What Jack and Gary have done, and you have to win the Masters.
Big name missing from here, someone who's been associated with this tournament, Tiger Woods.
Well, obviously the main impact is that the ratings for TV shows are down. He has a great impact on the ratings. He increases the ratings.
Tom Watson said it plainly. These men had no integrity. He did not whisper it. He did not keep it behind closed doors. He said it to journalists, wrote it in open letters, and once confronted a fellow champion face-to-face on a dirt road in the Arizona desert. Golf is a game built on honesty. It is one of the only sports in the world where the players call their own penalties. No referee stands behind every shot. No video official watches every move. The rules trust you to police yourself. That trust is not just tradition. It is identity. It is the invisible contract between every golfer and the game they play. For decades, one man has been willing to say out loud he thinks that contract has been broken. Tom Watson has looked some of golf's most famous names in the eye, and he has told them the same thing. You had no integrity. He accused one of them of cheating in front of a rules official and a journalist. He challenged another in a published letter that shook the entire institution of professional golf to its core. He said the words publicly, clearly, and without apology. Because for Watson, the game has always been worth the discomfort. Watson is an 8-time major champion. He has won 5 Open championships. He has stood on the leaderboard in the most pressurized moments the sport can offer, and he has delivered. But beyond the trophies and the records, Watson has built something rarer and more lasting. He has become the moral conscience of professional golf, the man who says the things others are too polite to say, the man who looks at a fellow champion and tells him, in front of the whole world, that what he did was wrong 8 times. In very public ways, Watson has pointed at the biggest names in golf and declared the same verdict. They failed the game. They damaged what made it great. They showed no integrity. If this kind of deep golf story is what you came for, use the hype feature right now and give this video some hype. It helps other fans find this content and it genuinely makes a difference. Now let us keep going. Those 8 names are not obscure players you have never heard of. They are legends, Hall of Famers, major winners, men with tens of millions of fans around the world. But Watson saw something in each of them that he could not leave unanswered. Something that was quietly chipping away at the very thing that makes golf different from every other professional sport. Today we go through all 8 cases, every moment, every accusation, every quote. By the end of this video, you will understand exactly why Tom Watson has been called the most important moral voice in the history of modern golf, and why so many of the sport's biggest stars have felt the full force of his judgment. 8 names, 8 stories. Let us open the first case. To understand why Watson's words carry so much weight, you have to understand what makes golf different in the first place. In almost every major professional sport, there are officials whose entire job is to enforce the rules. In basketball, a referee blows a whistle. In football, a flag gets thrown. In cricket, the umpire raises a finger. But golf does not work that way. Golf is a largely self-governed sport. The expectation has always been that you know the rules and that you follow them without being told. You call your own penalties. You do not move your ball. You do not improve your lie. You do not take an advantage that was not fairly earned. The game trusts you. And that trust is not a small thing. It is the entire foundation. Bobby Jones, one of the most revered figures in golf history, once called a penalty on himself during a major championship when nobody else saw the infraction. He could have said nothing. He would have won without any consequences. But he called it. When praised for his honesty later, Jones reportedly said he might as well be praised for not robbing a bank. To him, calling that penalty was not heroism or remarkable virtue. It was simply what you were supposed to do. It was the minimum the game required. That philosophy runs through the entire culture of the sport, and it is the standard Watson was raised on. His role models were men like Byron Nelson, Ben Hogan, and Jack Nicklaus, men whose records on the course were matched by their reputations away from it, men who understood that how you won mattered just as much as whether you won. Watson absorbed all of that. He did not just become a champion, he became a custodian of the values those men lived by. When Watson talks about integrity, he is actually talking about several things at once. You follow the rules exactly as written. You do not improve your lie. You do not touch growing vegetation behind your ball to gain an advantage. The letter of the rulebook is not negotiable, and it is not subject to personal interpretation on the course. The second layer is behavioral. Champion carries himself with dignity at all times. He does not throw clubs on the 16th fairway. He does not swear at the gallery. He does not conduct himself in a way that embarrasses the traditions of the game in front of a watching public. The third layer is institutional. You are loyal to the tours and organizations that gave you your career, that provided the stages on which you built your reputation. And the fourth layer, the deepest and most serious one, is moral. Where does your money come from? Who are you choosing to be in business with? What does that choice say about your values and your character? For Watson, integrity means all 4 layers simultaneously. That is a demanding standard, an exceptionally high bar, and Watson has applied it consistently across more than 4 decades in professional golf. He has not chosen silence to protect friendships. He has not looked the other way to avoid controversy. He has spoken up every single time he believed the game was being damaged. That is the man whose judgments we are about to examine. The most recent and most dramatic chapter in this story did not happen in the 1980s. It happened in 2024. At the Masters, the most prestigious tournament in the world, Watson sat down and spoke about the state of professional golf. What he described was not triumph, it was grief. Talked about players who used to sit together at the Champions Dinner at Augusta, sharing stories, sharing laughs, sharing the rare feeling of belonging to something much greater than themselves. He said that feeling was gone. He said the togetherness had vanished. His words were quiet, but they landed hard. Because they came from a man who had actually lived that brotherhood, and then watched it slowly dissolve around him. That sense of loss had been building for years before the 2024 Masters. In June of 2023, Watson did something that surprised even the people who knew him well. He wrote an open letter directly to PGA Tour Commissioner Jay Monahan and the Tour's policy board. It is one of the most significant documents produced about professional golf in the modern era. In it, Watson did not simply express disappointment or ask polite questions. He made a direct accusation. He said that both the players who had defected to LIV Golf and the Tour leadership itself shown a lack of integrity. LIV Golf was a breakaway competition funded by the Saudi Arabian Public Investment Fund, known as the PIF. The PGA Tour had previously argued, loudly and publicly, that taking money from that source was a moral issue. The tour pointed to the Saudi government's alleged connection to the September 11th attacks, a claim the kingdom denies, but one that remains a central concern for groups like 9/11 Families United. Watson had agreed with that moral position. He saw the players who stayed loyal to the tour as standing on the right side of a clear ethical line, and then the tour reversed course. It pursued a merger with the very organization it had spent years condemning on moral grounds. Watson called it hypocrisy. He asked how the tour could look the families of September 11th victims in the eye after everything that had been publicly stated. He questioned the transparency of the leadership, the fairness to the players who had stayed loyal, and the entire direction the institution was heading. His letter exposed a concern that went far beyond golf strategy or business decisions. It was a question about the soul of the sport. That letter was the clearest statement Watson had ever made as the game's moral guardian. It showed that his concern was not just about individual players breaking rules on a golf course in a single tournament. It was about the entire institution losing something that could not be bought back. The money flooding into the game from state-funded sources was, in Watson's view, eroding the very foundation that made professional golf worth watching and worth caring about. Now we rewind, because the 8 names Watson has challenged over the years tell the full story of how we arrived at this moment. Each one represents a different kind of failure, a different way the game's integrity was tested and, in Watson's view, found wanting. Let us go through them one by one. Number 1. Brooks Koepka. Brooks Koepka is one of the most decorated major champions of his generation. 4 major titles, a sustained period of dominance that few players in the history of the sport have managed to replicate. When LIV Golf came calling, Koepka answered. He signed with the breakaway tour funded by the Saudi Public Investment Fund and walked away from the PGA Tour. For many observers, that was simply a personal business decision. For Watson, it represented something far larger than any individual contract. Watson's 2024 Masters comments focused specifically on what Koepka's departure meant for the culture of the game. He talked about the Champions Dinner at Augusta, acknowledged that private gathering of past Masters champions that takes place each year before the tournament begins. Decades, it was a sacred tradition. Champions from different eras, different countries, different generations of the sport, all sitting together in a single room, sharing meals, sharing stories. Watson loved that tradition because it was the clearest expression of the togetherness he believed was central to professional golf at its highest level. With Koepka on LIV, that dinner carried a different energy. The fracture Watson described was not administrative. It was felt in the room. Watson said it directly. "We want to get together like we were at that Champions Dinner. Right now, we don't have it." Those words were not just about seating arrangements or awkward silences. They were a statement about what was lost when men who shared that rare distinction chose the money over the fellowship. Watson's case against Koepka is rooted in the concept of stature. Argued consistently that the stature of the PGA Tour, built over generations by the greatest players in the history of the sport, worth more than any financial offer that LIV could place on the table. Koepka had the wins, the platform, standing to be a genuine leader during a pivotal moment in the game's history. Instead, Watson believes he walked away from all of that. In doing so, he contributed to a fracture that Watson feels the sport has still not recovered from. The talent was never in question, but the choices a player makes when the game needs its champions most tell their own kind of story. For Watson, Koepka had a chance to be a defining voice for the sport's future. Instead, he became a symbol of the fracture Watson had feared was coming, as a legacy that no number of major trophies can completely erase. Number 2, Dustin Johnson. If Brooks Koepka's case is about fractured fellowship, Dustin Johnson's case is about something Watson considers even more fundamental: loyalty, and the question of what kind of money you are willing to accept, and from whom. Dustin Johnson was among the very first PGA Tour stars to sign with LIV Golf. He was not a reluctant late arrival. He was an early defector, one of the players who gave the breakaway league the credibility it needed at the most critical moment of its existence. And for Watson, that timing and that decision mattered enormously. Johnson is a two-time major champion and a former world #1. He built his career, his reputation, and his entire brand within the structure of the PGA Tour. Every opportunity he had, every sponsorship he earned, every ranking point he accumulated, every dollar he made before LIV came along came from the platform the tour provided. And then, when an enormous financial offer arrived from a league funded by the Saudi Public Investment Fund, Watson accepted it without hesitation. Watson's critique of Johnson is focused squarely on loyalty and on what Watson sees as a failure to properly consider the ethical implications of that choice. He asked the question plainly, is the money really worth the loss of the stature of the PGA Tour? For Watson, that is not a rhetorical question. He genuinely believes that if you think about it seriously, if you weigh the stature of the institution against a financial figure, the answer should be obvious. The stature wins. Watson's position is also rooted in something that goes beyond loyalty to a business institution. For him, the question of where the money comes from is inseparable from the question of integrity. LIV's funding came from a source carrying serious ethical questions. Questions that the tour itself had raised loudly. Watson believed those questions did not disappear because the numbers on a contract were very large. He believed every player who accepted that money was making a statement about what they valued and who they were willing to align themselves with. Johnson made his choice. Watson made his view clear, and the gap between those two positions is exactly what Watson has been arguing about for his entire career. Some choices define a player beyond the sport itself. For Watson, taking that money from that source at that moment in history was one of them. Number 3. Bryson DeChambeau. Bryson DeChambeau arrived on the PGA Tour as something the sport had never quite seen before. A physics major, a man who approached golf like a scientist, questioning every convention, seeking every advantage through data, equipment modifications, and sheer physical transformation. For many fans, that approach was exciting. For Tom Watson, it was a source of growing unease long before DeChambeau ever signed with a rival tour. Before DeChambeau joined LIV, Watson had already been watching his interactions with the sport's governing bodies with quiet concern. DeChambeau had developed a reputation for pushing against equipment standards and challenging officials in ways that Watson felt demonstrated a lack of respect for the traditions and the governing structures of the game. The humility that Watson considers a core requirement of any true champion was not something he recognized clearly in the way DeChambeau operated. When DeChambeau eventually defected to LIV, Watson's critique became more direct and more existential. He was not simply questioning a business decision, he was questioning what the pattern of choices said about the direction of the entire game. Where is the honor? Where is the integrity? We have a problem in our game. That was Watson's statement, not aimed at one player in isolation, but triggered in significant part by watching men like DeChambeau leave the sport's traditional structure behind. DeChambeau's approach to golf, for all its technical innovation, represents something Watson views as a deeper cultural problem. It is the idea that the game is a system to be optimized and exploited rather than a tradition to be honored and passed on. You can push every boundary, argue with every official, challenge every convention, and then simply move on to the next opportunity without ever considering what you owe the sport. Watson believes that attitude is corrosive, that it models the wrong values for every junior golfer who watches from the stands. The honor Watson talks about is not about being old-fashioned or resistant to change. It is about recognizing that the game existed long before you arrived and will continue long after you leave. Your job as a professional is not just to win. It is to add to the game's dignity rather than subtract from it. Watson's view, DeChambeau's pattern of behavior, culminating in his decision to join LIV, placed him firmly on the wrong side of that ledger. Number 4. Patrick Reed. Patrick Reed stands apart from every other name on this list for one important reason. His integrity issues have nothing to do with LIV Golf, rival tours, or geopolitical funding sources. His case is about something far more basic and far more personal. The rules of the game, the ones every golfer is supposed to follow. They're supposed to follow especially when nobody else is watching, and in Reed's case, even when everybody was watching. Reed's history with rules controversies did not begin when he turned professional. There were questions before that. The most documented and most damaging incident from his professional career came at the 2019 Hero World Challenge in the Bahamas. Reed was filmed by a television camera in the act of improving his lie in a waste area. He smoothed the sand behind his ball with his hand on 2 separate practice swings, which is a direct violation of the rules of golf. He was penalized 2 strokes. He disputed it, and the golf world watched with wide eyes. For Watson, Reed represents the most fundamental kind of integrity failure the game can produce. There is no complicated layer of geopolitics here, no debate about institutional loyalty or the source of a tour's funding. Just the simplest question in the sport. Do you follow the rules when the cameras are pointing at you? In Reed's case, even that basic standard was not met. Watson has been entirely direct about this standard. The rules are what they are. You have to be honest with yourself and the game. That sentence is short. It is simple, but it contains everything Watson believes about the spirit of golf. You do not need an official monitoring your every move. You do not need a camera crew present. You are supposed to know the rules and apply them to yourself, accurately and honestly, in every single situation the game puts in front of you. The phrase honest with yourself is the most revealing part. Watson is not just talking about external enforcement, talking about internal character. A player who repeatedly finds themselves at the center of rules controversies is not just encountering bad luck. In Watson's view, they are failing the most personal test the game presents. Test of the internal moral compass, the ability to recognize what is right even when doing it costs you something. That is the standard that has defined the greatest figures in golf history. And by that standard, Patrick Reed has repeatedly come up short. Watson's point is not that Reed is uniquely terrible as a person. It is that in a sport built entirely on self-governance, a pattern of rules controversies is a pattern of character. And patterns do not lie. Number 5. Sergio Garcia. Sergio Garcia has been one of European golf's most celebrated figures for the better part of 3 decades. Ryder Cup icon, a player of breathtaking natural skill who finally captured the 2017 Masters and proved he had the talent to win the game's most important titles. Watson's view of Garcia is shaped not just by what Garcia achieved, but by how he chose to carry himself along the way. The friction between Watson and Garcia goes back to the 2014 Ryder Cup at Gleneagles, where Watson served as the United States captain. That was a difficult week. The Americans lost to Europe in a match that exposed tensions within the U.S. team. Garcia, as one of Europe's most combative and passionate players, at the center of the competition's most charged moments. Watson's criticism of Garcia's conduct was rooted in what he saw as a consistent pattern of volatility. A player who could be brilliant and captivating one moment and petulant and undisciplined the next, who wore his frustrations in ways that Watson felt were unbecoming of a player representing the game at the very highest level. The idea Watson keeps returning to when discussing Garcia is the concept of the golfer as a representative. When you pull on a national uniform at the Ryder Cup, you are not playing for yourself alone. You are representing the sport, your country, and the deep traditions of the competition. Watson believed Garcia's public outbursts and his emotional inconsistency were a failure to honor that responsibility properly. You owe the jersey more than that. You owe the game more than that. When Garcia eventually joined LIV Golf, Watson viewed it as the natural conclusion of a career that had consistently placed personal interests and personal emotions above the stature of the sport. Watson's words on Garcia captured his entire philosophy in one clean line. It's about the stature of the game, showing humility when you represent it. Garcia had been given every platform professional golf could offer. He had been celebrated and loved for decades. And in the end, Watson believes he chose personal gain over the institution that made him who he was. Garcia's case is a reminder that Watson's standard does not only apply to rules violations or financial choices. It applies to temperament, to how a player carries himself in difficult moments, to whether he can set aside personal frustration in the service of something bigger. By that measure, Watson found Garcia consistently wanting. Number 6. Phil Mickelson. Phil Mickelson is the most layered and complex case on this entire list. His relationship with Tom Watson has multiple distinct chapters, and each chapter adds another dimension to the question of what integrity truly means in professional golf. The first chapter begins at the 2014 Ryder Cup at Gleneagles. Watson was the American captain. The team lost to Europe in a result that was painful for everyone in the United States camp. And at the post-match press conference, Mickelson did something that many in golf considered a serious breach of the unwritten code the sport lives by. He stood up and publicly criticized Watson's captaincy in front of the assembled media. He aired grievances in public that almost every tradition in golf holds should be handled privately. You talk to the captain behind closed doors. You express your concerns quietly through the appropriate channels. You do not publicly undermine the man who led you by going on record at a press conference. For Watson, that was a direct violation of the loyalty code he had always believed should govern the relationship between a player and his captain. It was a public act of disloyalty, and Watson did not forget it. But the second chapter is larger and more serious. Mickelson did not merely defect to LIV Golf as one player among many. According to the research behind Watson's 2023 letter, Mickelson was the primary architect of the defection. He was the most recognizable and most influential player who helped give the breakaway league the credibility it needed during its critical early period. And that role, combined with all the moral questions surrounding LIV's funding source, placed Mickelson at the very center of Watson's most serious criticisms. Watson's 2023 open letter and his comments at the 2024 Masters were widely understood to be directed significantly at Mickelson's choices. Watson framed the failure in terms of the moral issue. The PGA Tour had argued for years that taking money from the Saudi Public Investment Fund was ethically unacceptable. Mickelson knew that argument. He had heard it stated publicly and repeatedly by tour leadership, and then he set it aside completely and took the money anyway. Watson put the contradiction plainly. I understand the cries of hypocrisy. Disregarding the moral issue is a position which, for a long time, was publicly highlighted by tour leadership. Mickelson did not act out of ignorance. He chose to discard a moral position he was fully aware of. That is a specific and deliberate kind of integrity failure. For Watson, who has spent his entire career insisting that the game demands more from its champions than talent and victories, it is one of the most deeply disappointing failures of all. Number 7. Tiger Woods. Tiger Woods is the most famous golfer in the history of the sport. His dominance redefined what was thought possible in professional golf. And Tom Watson's critique of him is not about a rules violation on a specific hole or a contract signed with a rival tour. It is about something Watson considers equally important to all of those things. Responsibility that comes with being the most influential player the game has ever seen. By 2010, Woods was preparing to return to professional golf after a period of personal scandal that had consumed the sport's headlines for months. Watson chose not to make the personal scandal the focus of his critique. Instead, he focused on something more specific to the game itself. He focused on what he saw as a failure of stature in the way Woods had been conducting himself on the golf course. Watson's critique came during an interview in Dubai. He pointed to Woods' use of profanity on the course and his tendency to throw clubs when shots did not go the way he intended. To many casual observers, those were minor frustrations that any competitor might display in the heat of battle. To Watson, they were symptoms of a deeper problem, a failure to carry the full responsibility that came with being the most watched, most followed, most influential player in the history of the sport. Watson's argument rests on a clear and consistent principle. When you are the best player in the world, every junior golfer is watching how you behave. Every new fan forms their first impression of the sport based on how you carry yourself. Every television camera in the world is pointed at you. Your conduct does not represent just yourself. It represents every player who came before you and every player who will come after. Responsibility comes with the position, whether you want it or not. Did not accept that a player carrying the stature Woods had accumulated could behave in ways that Byron Nelson, Ben Hogan, or Jack Nicklaus would not have recognized as befitting a champion. Said it directly, Tiger has to take ownership. He needs to clean up his act and show the respect for the game that other people before him have shown. Watson also suggested that Woods' public return should not come through a tournament, but a genuine and transparent conversation. He admitted his failures and committed to a different standard going forward. Ability and ownership were not optional for a player in Woods' position. Watson believed they were required. This critique marked a clear shift in how Watson was understood publicly. Before this moment, he had been known primarily as a technical enforcer of the rules. The Gary player confrontation had defined him in that role. But with Tiger, he became something else as well. He became an arbiter of character, of the way a champion must carry himself in the most watched moments of his sport. That distinction matters, because it tells you that the standard Watson applies is not only found in the rulebook, it is found in the soul of the game. Number 8, Gary player. Now we arrive at the case that started it all. The confrontation that first showed the world exactly who Tom Watson was and exactly what he was willing to risk to protect the integrity of the game he loved. The year was 1983. The event was the inaugural Skins game in the Arizona desert at Desert Highlands Golf Club. This was not an ordinary exhibition. It was one of the highest-paying events in golf at the time. The total purse was $360,000. Understand what that number meant. Consider this. The Masters champion that same year earned $90,000 for winning one of the most prestigious titles in all of sport. The Skins game was offering 4 times that amount in a short exhibition event. The 4 players competing were the biggest names of the era: Jack Nicklaus, Arnold Palmer, Gary Player, and Tom Watson. And the pressure to perform for that kind of money was real. The critical moment came at the 16th hole, a 240-yard par 3 where $120,000 in accumulated skins were sitting on the line. An enormous sum by any measure. Gary Player was preparing to play his second shot from the right side of the green when Watson observed an action that made him stop cold. Player reached down and removed a leaf from behind his ball. Player described it as a loose impediment, which is a category of material that the rules of golf permit you to remove. But Watson did not see a loose impediment. He saw a rooted leaf, growing weed. And under the rules of golf, you cannot remove anything that is fixed or growing in order to improve your lie or your line of play. That is one of the clearest rules the game has. Watson did not confront Player in the middle of the hole. He waited. He gathered himself. He was certain about what he had seen, and he was not going to act impulsively. After the round on a dirt road behind the 18th green, rules official Joe Day present and journalist Dave Anderson within earshot, Watson turned to Gary Player and delivered one of the most famous confrontations in golf history. "I'm accusing you, Gary. You can't do that. I'm tired of this. I wasn't watching you, but I saw it." Every word in that statement is deliberate. Accusing you is not a suggestion or a polite question. It is a direct, formal charge. "Tired of this" tells you everything about Watson's state of mind. He was not reacting to an isolated moment. He viewed this as part of a longer pattern of behavior he had been watching for years. And "I wasn't watching you, but I saw it" is perhaps the most extraordinary line of all. Watson was not conducting surveillance. He was not trying to catch anyone out. He simply happened to see what he saw, and he was not going to pretend otherwise, no matter how famous or respected the man in front of him was. Player called the accusation staggering. In his later writings, he described being accused of cheating as the most heinous charge you can lay against a golfer. He maintained that the leaf was loose and that he had followed the rules. No formal ruling was made against him. But Watson did not retract a single word. Yeah, he believed what he saw, he said it out loud, and he accepted every consequence that followed, including the awkwardness, the controversy, and the damage to a relationship that had existed for years. The money tells its own story, too. Player finished that event as the largest earner, taking home $170,000. Watson earned $10,000. He lost the financial battle completely. He walked away having said the truth as he saw it, one of the most celebrated golfers in the world in the most direct and unambiguous terms possible. No politics, no softening, no second thoughts. And for Watson, that was not a small thing. That was everything the game had ever asked him to be. Golf is one of the most enduring sports in the world. It has survived a great deal over the past century. Economic downturns, all with the passing of generations, the rise of enormous commercial forces. Every era has brought its own test to the game's integrity and its traditions. Every era has also produced people willing to stand up and say, "This is where the line is. This is what the game is worth." Tom Watson has been one of those people for more than 4 decades. He has given the sport cannot be measured in prize money or trophy counts. He has provided something far rarer, a consistent, principled, and fearless voice that says the game matters more than any individual player, any single contract, and any financial offer on the table. He has called out the greatest golfer who ever lived. He has faced a legend down on a dirt road in the desert. He has written an open letter that challenged the integrity of an entire institution. He has done all of it because he genuinely believes that what golf stands for is worth the discomfort of saying uncomfortable things. The standard Watson has established, what has come to be understood as the Watsonian standard, asks 4 things of every professional golfer. Follow the rules without exception. Carry yourself with dignity in every public moment. Stay loyal to the institutions that built your career, and be honest about the moral weight of the choices you make. That is a high bar. Very few players can clear it perfectly. Watson has never claimed the standard is easy. He has only ever said it is necessary. Golf is at a crossroads right now. The money in the game has never been larger. The commercial forces reshaping the sport are more powerful than anything past generations ever had to face. The fractures Watson described at the 2024 Masters are real and they are visible. They are felt in rooms that used to feel like sanctuaries of brotherhood. But the game has survived everything that has been thrown at it so far. It survived what happened on that dirt road in 1983. It survived the storm of 2010. It is navigating the LIV era. And at every difficult moment, the voices that mattered most were the ones brave enough to say what was right even when saying it was hard. Watson's hope, and the hope of every fan who cares about this game at its deepest level, the next generation of champions understand what is truly at stake. That winning alone is not the whole answer. Stature matters. That the way you win, the company you keep, the choices you are willing to live with publicly, and the things you are willing to protect say as much about you as any trophy you ever lift. The game gave Tom Watson everything he ever asked of it. In return, he gave the game this: a standard, a benchmark, a challenge to every player who follows. Names on his list will be debated for years, the arguments will continue. But the standard itself, the insistence that the game demands more than talent, more than trophies, more than contracts, that standard is not going anywhere. The question he leaves behind has never been complicated. It is the same question it has always been in golf. Can you meet that?